I want to thank you for joining us today. Halloween, I'm wearing my Halloween sweater to talk about the newest GHSA report. We're very excited about the report. I'm very proud to say that we are celebrating 20 years of a partnership with Ford Motor Company Fund, and particularly our Driving Skills for Life program, which is what prompted us to write this report. But also we thought it was a really important time to take a look back and see how we've been doing in terms of addressing teen driver safety here in the United States. So the report, which I'm going to talk about, I'm going to share some key findings from the report, as well as talk about what's bringing down the numbers, and you'll see those in a minute, as well as where do we go from here. And then I'm also going to be joined by a colleague who is very active in teen driver safety, and I'll introduce him in just a little bit. But the report was something that I had the privilege of authoring, but I also want to acknowledge Dr. Jim Hedlund, who did the data analysis for this report. You may be familiar with Jim. He had a long career with NHTSA and really has been a tremendous resource in terms of the work we've done in this area. So Jim did the data analysis, and we worked together on the information that you'll see in terms of the policies and programs we're going to talk about and the recommendations. So I'm going to jump right into this, and if we can go to the first full slide. I just want to give you a little bit of information about the Driving Skills for Life program, just to kind of tee it up. It's a free program, if you're not familiar with it, that teaches teens critical skills that they really need to be safe out there on the road. We're talking about hazard recognition, speed and space management, vehicle control, but then there's also some modules that focus on impairment and distraction, as well as sharing the road with other road users. So if you're not familiar with the program, I encourage you to check it out at drivingskillsforlife.com. And let's dig right into the data on this next slide. So we did this analysis of 20 years of FARS data. We're talking 2002 to 2021. And I want to first start by talking about how we define the young drivers we talk about in this report. These are people who are 20 years of age or younger, and we define older drivers as people who are 21 years of age and up. So I think most of us know, who are working in the teen driving space, that young driver crash rates are nearly 4 times higher than that of older drivers per miles driven. But the good news is that we're making progress here. And I'm going to walk you through some of the tables that you can dig into deeper in the report. The first one really illustrates our analysis of FARS data and what we found in terms of fatal crashes involving a young driver. What you see there is a tremendous drop, 38%. But at the same time, the fatal crash involvement for older drivers actually went up by 7.5%. The findings from a comparison of traffic fatalities involved that involved teens and did not involve teens or young drivers is shown in the next table. And you can see again, great gains for young drivers, but a negative situation for older drivers. And one other thing I want to point out before we move to the next slide is that when teens are involved in these fatal crashes and someone dies, in many cases, it is not the teen. In 2021, 63% of people killed in crashes involving a young driver were either their passengers, occupants of other vehicles, or pedestrians or bicyclists. So on the next slide, we also looked at young and older driver fatalities. And again, you see the significant change. You can go to that next slide, Olivia. You see the significant change that's occurring here. Our analysis found that deaths for young drivers fell about 45% compared to that 11% increase for older drivers. And if you look back at 2002, young drivers accounted for about 14.8%, almost 15% of all driver fatalities. But going now to 2021, that rate actually fell to 7.9%, which is nearly a 50% increase. So on the next slide, we also want to take a focus on, go ahead to the next slide, Olivia, thank you. We really want to take a look at crash involvement. And the best measure of young driver fatal crash involvement would be fatal crashes per miles traveled, or VMT. But we don't have national VMT driver data by age. It's not available. So what Dr. Hedlund did was look at per licensed driver. So fatal crashes per licensed driver. So the proportion of young persons who are licensed drivers has decreased. You can see that on table 4. It has gone down. And this decline is the result of a variety of factors, things like increased anxiety. Some teens just do not have an interest in driving. It scares them. Financial issues, costs of owning and operating a vehicle, as well as licensing. Environmental concerns, access to other modes of transportation, and of course, social media. Teens have a way to connect without having to be in person. So we see that the number of licensed young drivers decreased. And at the same time, they went up for older drivers. And that leads us to table 5, which shows how the rate of fatal crash involvement has really changed for both young and older drivers. You can see that it fell significantly for young drivers. It also decreased for older drivers, but not at the same rates that we saw. And I think it's really important to note here, some people might think, well, wait a minute, we've seen this drop in teen licensure, that's got to be a factor. And what we found is the drop in teen licensure accounted for less than 1/4 of the decline in young driver fatal crash involvement. So it's not as significant as you might assume. The other thing we did, and we're going to go to the next slide for this one, is we also looked at the young driver fatal crash rates and how those rates have changed over 20 years by state. And we see that they do vary substantially. And this is just a snapshot of table 6. The table 6 through tables 7, 8, 9, 10 all cover all the states. And when you look at the report, you'll see that. But in 2021, the fatal crash involvement rate ranged from 1.66 deaths per 10,000 licensed drivers in the state of Minnesota, which was the best, to 17.17 in Washington, D.C., which is the highest. And the national average is about 4.27. What we did find is that our analysis saw that that rate decreased in all but 3 states and the District of Columbia. So we are definitely seeing gains across the country, and that's really, really important. So let's talk about what's driving this. What are the factors behind this? And on the next slide, what we're looking at is really 5 things. It really is policy or programmatic activities that research confirms have had the greatest impact. These are not my suppositions. These are not what we think. These are based on research, and you can see them here on the list. And I want to talk real briefly, just share a couple of data points about each one. So when we talk about graduated driver's licensing, or GDL, we know it's the most effective tool we have in our toolbox for teen driver safety. This 3-step licensing process is really responsible for novice driver crash rates falling from anywhere from 20 to 40%. There's also some research from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety showing that restrictions on nighttime driving and teen passengers, along with delays in licensure age, reduce both fatal crashes and insurance losses for young drivers. Also, delays in permit age reduce fatal crashes, and increases in practice hours reduce insurance losses. Very, very important. I think it's also important to talk about parents. Parents are so critical to this. They are really our teens' primary driving teachers and coaches. And when they monitor and regularly coach their teens, it has a huge impact. There was some real seminal research done by Children's Hospital of Philadelphia about a decade ago that confirmed that teens are less likely to crash and violate the law if they have parents who set, monitor, and enforce safe driving practices. We call these authoritative parents. And when they have set these high expectations and they nurture their young drivers, we see their teens are more likely to drive safely at far greater rates than teens who do not have a authoritative parent. I mean, that's really, really important. And what we've seen over the past 20 years is some states, a handful of states, are requiring parent education, while others have developed some voluntary programs. And nearly all the state highway safety offices and DMVs across the country are providing information to help parents understand the critical role they play. That third item is driver education and training. Now, we know that there's been a lot of, conversation back and forth about does it work or doesn't it work? And the DeKalb study done a number of years ago seemed to say it did not, and that prompted a lot of states to say we're no longer going to fund this. But there's more recent study done in the states of Oregon, in Nebraska, that clearly show that teens who complete required driver education and training do much better out there on the roads than their counterparts who do not go through mandated training. And right now, about half the states currently require drivers under 18 to complete driver education and training before they can be licensed. And I think this is really important to think about this. There was some research done recently in the state of Ohio by Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that looked at when teens got their license at different ages and how they did. And they found that compared with drivers who were licensed at 18, those who were licensed at 16 had 27% lower crash rates in their first 2 months of licensure and a 14% lower rate in the first year. And we see some comparable gains as well for 17-year-olds. And what we're really saying here is that in many states under GDL requirements, licensing requirements, if you're 18 and you wait until then, you don't have to go through driver education and training. Whereas if you're 16 or 17, you often do. And there are real gains to teens getting this experience, this training out there on the road, both in the classroom and on the road. The fourth item is peer-to-peer programs, traffic safety programs. When we enlist teens to educate their peers about traffic safety, we know it's a proven countermeasure that has played a role in young driver crash reduction. And there's also research that says that teens who regularly participate in positive social projects designed to help their peers and others are less likely to engage in risky behaviors. But I do want to stress, I want to offer a caveat, if you will. To specifically prevent crashes, these peer-to-peer programs really should be one component of a broader environmental strategy that includes families, schools, neighborhoods, and communities. But we know that there have been a number of peer-to-peer programs that have been developed over the past couple decades. And I cite one in the report, which I encourage you to check out. It's Teens in the Driver's Seat, which is based in Texas, and it has been especially effective. There's been some really interesting research done in terms of understanding increases in awareness among teens who go through the program, and also found some really strong reductions in injury and fatal crashes in counties where the program has been sustained for 3 years or more. So I encourage you to check it out. And then the last item on the list is obviously safer vehicles and teen-specific technologies. And vehicles have become increasingly safer for everybody, not just teen drivers. But one particular safety feature, electronic stability control, which has been required on vehicles since 2012, has been particularly beneficial to young drivers. ESC really substantially reduces fatal crash risk resulting from loss of vehicle control. And then there's some other safety features, things like blind spot monitoring, lane keeping assist, automatic emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, and speed limit recognition. These technologies can make a huge difference for young drivers. Also, we've got teen-specific technologies that automakers have developed, things like Ford's MyKey. Kia has their UVO system. Hyundai's created a link called BlueLink, or an app, excuse me, called BlueLink, and GM has Teen Driver. And these technologies give parents the ability to control things that can trip up teens and cause problems, things like high rates of speed, not wearing their seatbelt. And then they can receive alerts when teens are doing things in violation of some of the guide rails, if you will, parents set up. So for instance, they can limit the rate of speed. They can limit use of the radio if the teens aren't buckled up, things like that. So these technologies can be tremendously helpful. And again, there's been some recent research really showing how some of these features really can work to make a difference, both the teen-specific technologies as well as the in-vehicle technologies. So that's really important. And again, I encourage you to dig into it in the report. So let's go to the next slide and let's talk about where do we go from here. We know these things are working, have made a difference over the past 20 years, but how do we continue the gains that we've made in young driver crash rates and fatal crashes overall? And one thing I really want to point out, and I mentioned this in the report, is that, you know, how do we get to zero with this age group? And I believe that young drivers, more than any other age group out there, has the greatest potential for reaching this milestone of zero first. But it's going to take us doing more to get there. I think we have to build on the 5 proven countermeasures that I just talked about, and I'm going to add a 6th, which I will share with you in just a little bit. And the one thing I want to point out is that all these countermeasures support the 6 principles of the safe system approach, which is the foundation of our national roadway safety strategy. They also align with the 5 safe system elements, and 3 of those elements in particular: safe road users, safe vehicles, and safe speeds, which when you put them all together, they create a layer of protection to help young drivers and those that they're sharing the road with. So the safe system approach focuses on those things, but it also emphasizes equity across all disciplines and a greater focus on prioritizing the safety of all road users, not just drivers. And I'm going to talk more about those things as well. So let's go to the next slide and let's walk through those countermeasures I just talked about, but let's talk about how do we build on them? What are our recommendations? First and foremost, because we know GDL is so effective, we need to strengthen our laws and make them even better. No state law is perfect, particularly when you take into account what we have determined through, again, research and study and talking to the experts, the best practices that are out there. And those things include calling for a minimum permit age of 16 that includes at least 70 hours of supervised practice, and then an intermediate license age of 17. And then during that minimum licensing, the intermediate licensing age, the nighttime driving restriction should start at 8 p.m. and no teen passengers should be in the vehicle. And yes, I know this sounds incredibly draconian, but it is absolutely grounded in research. And let me share a couple things. So young drivers in states with older licensing ages have lower fatal crash rates and fewer insurance collision claims. So raising the age from 16 to 17 for intermediate licensure is associated with a 13% lower fatal crash rate among 15 to 17-year-olds and a 9% reduction in collision claims among 16-year-olds. Now, I live in New Jersey, and our state has the oldest minimum intermediate licensing age. It's 17. And that policy has been in effect longer than our GDL law. So not surprisingly, having that age eliminates most crashes involving 16-year-olds, but it has also resulted in much lower combined crash rates for both 16 and 17-year-old drivers when you compare our state to other states surrounding us. And I think that's important. Our law in New Jersey also applies to all young drivers under 21. So as a result, the benefits of GDL have resulted in reductions in crashes for 18-year-olds, and that's a very important finding. In fact, studies conducted by researchers at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia support states extending GDL to 18 through 20-year-olds. So again, the report talks about this, and you can go and look at the research that I'm referring to. Also, when it comes to practice, more is better. And recent research in Ohio found that for every month a teen spends in the learner's permit stage, crash rates were reduced by 2%. So there's an absolute gain. And the last thing I want to mention about strengthening laws, it'll not only benefit young drivers, but all road users. As I said before, when teens crash, they don't just injure or kill themselves and their peers. And according to NHTSA, in 2021, over 5,600 people were killed in crashes involving young drivers. So let's go to the next recommendation, the next slide, and we're going to talk about parents and that critical role. We need to do more to bolster parent, guardian involvement, and also other adults as well. So let me talk about parents first. I said before, they play a critical role in their child's learning to drive experience, but they also need to understand and enforce their state GDL law. There are surveys, however, that confirm that it's really a mixed bag when it comes to parents knowing about GDL and the awareness of the risk for their teen drivers. So what we recommend is that we build a parent education component into state young driver licensing requirements. And this can be delivered both online or face-to-face. But I've got to point out that research indicates that the face-to-face is the optimal way to do this, because it really helps, you know, create conversation and discussion, and helps clear up the confusion about how and why GDL works. These programs also help parents make the link between graduated driver's licensing restrictions and young driver risk. And once parents get this, they're more likely to view GDL as a supportive program rather than a government dictate. And this is so critical, because GDL is first and foremost a parent program that is designed to help their teens survive their most dangerous driving years. So parents need to not only understand their GDL laws, what's in them, but they also need to understand these are the minimum standards that they should be aiming for and exceeding. So it's not a guideline or the maximum to aim for, but they need to exceed these minimum standards. And then when you think about other adult influencers, they also need to understand the risk for teens. We've got lots of adults spending time with teens outside the home. We've got coaches and teachers and scout leaders and clergy members and others in their lives. And so they too can help reinforce the GDL programs. So we need to educate those folks as well. Let's go to the next one. We talked about driver education and training, but we need to ensure that the training is meeting, really meeting the needs of our highest risk drivers out there on the road. So in the report, we talk about the novice teen driver education and training administrative standards. Yes, that's a mouthful. That was developed by the Association of National Stakeholders in Traffic Safety, a group referred to as ANSI. GHSA is a member of that group. And these standards were developed and substantiated through research, as well as through the collective knowledge of a number of subject matter experts. We're encouraging states to look at those standards, match them up against what they're doing now, and incrementally over time make improvements. This is so important. We also need to make sure that driver education training is available to everybody, regardless of age, gender, language, race, or any other characteristics, and that the curricula are culturally equitable. Can't overstate that. And there's some great information on the ANSI website about that. The other piece of this that's so important is we have to make sure that we're addressing the financial barriers that prevent some teens from enrolling in driver education and training. And this is really critical, because we know young drivers who complete mandatory driver education and training do much better than their non-trained peers. But the cost really can be a factor, particularly in states where it's only available through private or for-profit schools. This can be prohibitive for many families. So as a result of that, some teens have to wait until they're 18 to get a license. And what that means is they're not realizing the benefits of graduated driver's licensing. And I want to point to Washington State. We talk about this in the report. They did some research between 2016 and 2020. 44% of drivers 25 and under completed a driver ed course, 44%. And then a survey conducted by the Washington Traffic Safety Committee, the Highway Safety Office, found that non-white young people are more likely to wait until they're 18 to obtain a license, with more than half citing costs as the reason for that. And at the same time, when you look at their data, their fatality data, Black, Indigenous, and people of color 15 to 24 years of age are disproportionately represented in the state's fatal crashes. So the legislature is considering several bills that would require anyone 21 or younger to complete driver education as a prerequisite for licensure, and also another bill that would provide vouchers to help those who could not afford the training. And here's the thing I think that's really, to me, the most profound. The Highway Safety Office in Washington estimates that 70% higher injury or rate of injury or death for people who did not complete a driver education course. And in addition to that, young drivers who get their license at 18 were 50% more likely to get into a crash in their first year of driving compared to those who did so at 16. Pretty profound. So I encourage you to check that out and to think about how do we remedy this problem. So the next slide, we're going to talk peer-to-peer for just a minute. Mentioned that it's a viable component of a broader teen traffic safety strategy, but we know not all programs are created equally. And number one, is all these programs that we're delivering out there, these peer-to-peer programs should be teen-led. Teens have to have a voice in this effort, or it really isn't a true peer-to-peer program. And that is one of 8 success indicators that we've identified through research and work we did in partnership with NHTSA. The others are, these programs have to be inclusive, open to all, sustainable. They should have facilitated training provided to the teens to help them understand the problems and then the proven countermeasures. They should have measurable objectives. They need to be positive and not fear-based. We need to incentivize and recognize teens, but also understand that they just want to be challenged and do meaningful work. And there must be an evaluation component. So you see on the screen, the URL I posted there, that is NHTSA's peer-to-peer teen traffic safety program guide that talks about these success indicators. If you are doing a program, that peer-to-peer program, or you're thinking about building one, or you're funding one, I strongly urge you to look at this document to really say, where does my program, or how will my program measure up? These are the indicators that should be built into these programs. So, and there's also a compendium of programs in there that are using most of these indicators, and you can use those for reference. The last area I want to focus on in terms of those proven countermeasures, and it's on the next slide, is really talking more about vehicle technology. Parents need to understand the importance of putting their teen in a vehicle that has as many safety features as possible. This gives them access to driver assistance features that have the potential to prevent or mitigate up to 75% of their fatal crashes. And this can be done through parent education programs and other materials. But the other point I want to make about this is that in addition to doing this, parents and teens really need to understand how this technology works. And that's really been challenging. We're seeing real deficiencies in people understanding what's in their vehicles. And when they don't understand what's in their vehicles, it really undermines, what we're trying to do here in terms of the safety benefit or safety gain. In some cases, people are turning these systems off. And that, to me, is so frustrating because we know these technologies can make such a huge difference. The other thing I want to point out is that we also need to make sure that teens are understanding just what these things can and cannot do. They need to understand what lane keeping assist means. They need to understand what automatic emergency braking means and so forth. These technologies really can make a huge difference. And just looking at some of the stuff, and I get into much more detail in this in the report, but it's estimated that something like lane departure warning technology, which is in many new vehicles, could prevent about 6,500 young driver crashes a year. Blind spot monitoring could prevent about 4,500, and automatic emergency braking could prevent about 110,000 crashes. And this is all information coming from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. So we need to ensure automakers and dealers educate drivers of all ages about the life-saving benefit of this technology. And then we need to expand this education to vehicles equipped with young driver-specific technology. I talked about Ford MyKey and Kia's OVU system and so forth. These are technologies that can work, but here's the rub. Again, do parents know about them? Are they using them? So a study was done of parents who own Ford vehicles equipped with MyKey, and they found that only about half were aware their vehicles had this technology. And of the parents that knew their vehicle had it, only about a third was using it. And when asked why, they didn't think it would provide a safety benefit. But this technology can really make a huge difference. It can give parents the ability to monitor and advise and coach and work with their teens to address risky behaviors like speeding and lack of seatbelt use, which contribute to about 40% of teen driver deaths. So we need to make sure that parents are using this information and recognize that there is some real safety gain to be had here. And then the last piece I'll point out about technology is we know that for some families this technology in these new vehicles can be out of reach for some, but there are some low or no cost apps that we can certainly leverage. And we all know cell phones are ubiquitous with teens. They're using these devices really to keep tabs on teen drivers is another opportunity for us. So think about this. I want to give you an example. For about 30% of fatalities involving 16 and 17-year-olds happen between 9 and 6 a.m., 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. So an app that notifies parents about curfew violations could help them better enforce a nighttime driving restriction. So we need parents to understand this, and we need them to not only use these apps, but also make sure that when they get these alerts, that they are then acting upon them, that they are working with their teens to address these issues, if you will, and that's really important. And then the last thing I want to point out, which is on this final slide, is a sixth recommendation that we want to really encourage the states, encourage those who are working in the teen driver safety space to think about. And this really is a focus on incorporating technology and driver responsibility into education. Our vehicles are evolving, and as they continue to evolve, we need to make sure that our youngest and riskiest drivers really understand and are using this technology correctly. This training should address how the technology functions, its limitations, and the conditions or situations that it was or wasn't designed for. Because this is so important, because we know inaccuracies can lead to driver over-reliance or overestimation of the technology's capabilities, which can be deadly for young drivers. So they need to know about the safety features, including opportunities to try them out in a controlled setting. And that's going to help really bridge the gap between, the knowledge gap and really bolster use and safety. And I think what's really important here is, as we look at this discussion in the safety arena about level 2 and level 3 automated vehicles, they cannot drive themselves without attention from the person behind the wheel. Some people think they can, and that's simply not the case. And we have to address this misperception, because it has been the cause of many crashes. Now, our new young drivers, this is a generation that's more likely than their parents to embrace technology, but it's critical that they're provided accurate information about what exists today and how it works, so their interaction is safe and appropriate. Thinking about evolving technology, we also need to provide behind the wheel experience regarding electric vehicles, or EVs. Electric vehicles often feel faster due to their ability to quickly produce maximum torque. And plus, they also have one pedal technology, which is kind of mind-boggling to me. I think teens may probably find it pretty easy to adapt to the one pedal, maybe more so than their parents, but they're not likely to recognize the danger associated with the torque. And we know speed is a real problem for young drivers, because they account for a greater proportion of speed-related fatalities than older drivers. So as they get more comfortable behind the wheel, their speed tends to increase. So helping them understand what's going on with electric vehicles, so we can kind of temper their enthusiasm to see how fast that EV goes, is really, really important. We also need to make sure that what we're teaching our teens includes thinking about the safety of people outside the vehicles. It is the responsibility of the driver to think about what they're doing that is going to impact others. Here in the US, we've seen our pedestrian and bicycle fatality rates go to record highs. They're the highest they've been in 4 decades. So we have to educate teens about the critical role they play in keeping other road users safe, so we reverse this trend. I'm really excited about the fact that through our partnership with Ford Fund and the Driving Skills for Life program, we are looking to incorporate these things, and have started doing so, into the Driving Skills for Life program. And we really do challenge others who are providing driver education and training to think about how they can do the same in their curricula. I think that's really important. So let's take it to the last slide, if you will, Olivia. And I think we're back to where we started. You can see again the report, and this is the URL where you can find it. Olivia also mentioned that we have the PDF of the report in the handout section. So what I want to do right now is I want to invite a longtime friend and colleague to join me here on screen. So Mike, can I ask you to turn on your camera? There he is. Hey, Mike.
Hi, Pam. Thanks so much for having me, and I want to congratulate you on a it's a really wonderful report. I read through it. The data is fantastic and very encouraging.
Well, thank you. And people will probably say, now, who is Mike? Mike Speck is a colleague and friend, and I'm going to just let Mike share his background and the work he does, particularly with the Ford Driving Skills for Life program. So the floor is yours, Mike.
Thanks, Pam. I appreciate it. Yeah, so as Pam said, my name's Mike Speck. Right now, I act as an executive producer on the Ford Driving Skills for Life program. My career in driver education actually started way back in the late 80s. My original intent was to be a professional race car driver, and I took the steps I thought I needed to achieve that goal. But what I found very quickly was that I was a much better coach than I was a race driver. So over the past 30 or so years, I've been involved in all kinds of driver training. And during that time, it's evolved into really becoming more specific in the teen driver training arena. And I've been with the Ford Driving Skills for Life program, back, I think my first program was in 2005. So I've been with that program for 18 years. And it's been a wonderful journey. And we've seen some terrific evolution in the area of teen driver education. And I think that's probably what we're going to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, let's jump into that, Mike. I really want to get your perspective. And you think about, I've talked a lot about the importance of driver education training, and there's absolutely research that backs up its value. But thinking specifically about teens and the teens you worked with, and you worked with many teens, how have you seen the process in terms of working with teens changed over the past 20 years when it comes to driving? What are you seeing?
So we're seeing a few things, and I want to make this clear. These are anecdotal observations. I don't have data to back this up because we can't really follow the teens that we train. So these are observations over a long career. But I would say that we're seeing a couple of things. One big thing is that teens, and you mentioned this earlier, Pam, aren't as engaged with the driving process. That is to say, they're not as interested in learning to drive or even in becoming a driver. They have other means to stay engaged with their friends, and that's causing some teens to learn to drive later in life. And I think what you pointed out with the lack of driver training post 18, that's a real concern. But I do think a lot of these teens, through anxiety issues, through a lack of wanting to take on responsibility, are not wanting to drive. So that's one of the biggest things that we're seeing. Those teens that are interested in driving are entering a driving dynamic that folks our age never saw. Cars now I've never seen a shift in vehicle development quite as extreme as what we're seeing right now. And that is absolutely affecting the teens. There's a lot for them to learn on what these vehicles can and can't do. But another thing that we're doing, and I really have to credit the Ford Motor Company Fund with doing this, is that they're opening up spherically the idea of mobility. And so now a teen driver is also looking at it not just as a driver, but also from the perspective of being a vulnerable road user. From the Ford Fund's perspective, their feeling is that everybody should be able to get to their destination safely. Everybody has that right to do that, regardless of where they come from, what their financial backing is, all of that. And so we're beginning to teach teens more of that spherical idea that it's a shared process in using roadways. And finally, I think with this safe systems approach, the advent of this wonderful system, we're going to see teens being able to take on more of that idea as well, that it indeed is a shared responsibility, whether you're a pedestrian or a driver.
Can you speak a little bit about how you do this? How do you train drivers to be cognizant of the other road users? How do you do that?
So there are a few ways that you can do it. Obviously, education's the big key. They need to be aware that this is happening. On our particular programs, we use a set of VR goggles that have scenarios built into those goggles. They're so realistic that in fact, when I first put them on, the situation was so realistic that I found myself reacting to situations that weren't actually there. But we put the goggles on folks, and then they ride a bike that's on a bike stand, so they're pedaling that bike. And in the goggle, there are scenarios where they learn very, very quickly what can happen if, as a cyclist, they're not aware of drivers, and if, as a driver, they're not aware of cyclists. That it becomes a situation where it opens up their field of view physically, literally, and figuratively. They become more aware of the entire situation of mobility that way. So we do that at just about every single event. And then we're beginning to incorporate kind of these ideas of the actual physical space required for a driver to safely negotiate vulnerable road users, and for vulnerable road users to safely negotiate drivers. Ford of Europe, specifically in UK, they do a wonderful system that we're going to be doing here in the States, where they take a foam bike on a rail and they pass that bike near a vehicle. And so the person that's in the vehicle will see just how close that is. And it's going to teach them how to open the door effectively. In Europe, they teach what's called the Dutch reach. We're going to be doing that here in the States, actually beginning very, very quickly here, where we have the driver use the opposing hand. So if they're sitting on the left, they're going to use their right hand to actually open the door. That turns their body so that they look behind them to see if anybody's coming. And it's such a simple idea in concept, and it is enormously effective. So those are some of the things that we do to make the teens aware.
That's great. I think that's terrific. One of the other things that you and we've done this together through the program is really talk with parents about how critical they are as coaches, as those folks who are monitoring and guiding and so forth, the work that they do. But the one, I think, I did this, I taught my son how to drive, and I'm not a driving, professional. And it was challenging, but it is far more than just, them getting comfortable with steering and accelerating and braking. And how do we help parents understand, what's involved in being that coach, but helping our kids learn those, what we call higher order skills, if you will?
Yeah. There's so many areas there, Pam. And one of the big things, as you know, we do a parent module, and that's been a recent evolution with the Ford Driving Skills for Life program. I know that there are other programs out there as well that also do these parent modules. And that dynamic between parent and teen is so particular and so specific. But there are some general guidelines that we ultimately end up teaching the parents that help them to become better coaches. And one of the leading things is if you want your teen to drive a certain way, then when you're driving the car and your teen is riding, you need to model good behavior. And even though this sounds simple, it is incredibly difficult, I think, for a lot of people to model the exact behavior that they want their teens to have behind the wheel. I mean, I do this for a living. I've been doing it for a living for a long time. I like to think I'm pretty good at it. And I have to tell you, I am not perfect, not by any means. I mean, I'm a human, and I make mistakes when I'm teaching my kids how to drive. But I do make sure that my teens know, hey, dad made a mistake there. This is not modeling good behavior. This is what we should do. So I think modeling good behavior is a major component. You mentioned the GDLs, and I think they are a wonderful tool. As you have mentioned, they address the bare minimum, but they will continue to evolve. I'm sure the Washington State example that you gave is a wonderful example. I read that in the report to try to make sure that folks are getting more education before they actually get their license. And so we teach the parents to make sure that they do really understand the GDLs. We also teach the parents to stay engaged. You know, be aware of what your kid is doing. And so many parents out there feel that it's as though they're spying on their teens, and you sort of have to work that out with your teen and maybe with yourself. You know,
Yeah.
you have to have kind of an honest conversation with yourself on your parenting and how you want to approach that. But the data shows that parents that are engaged in what their teens do, not just in driving, but in anything, those teens are going to see better outcomes. They're going to see better success. How those parents stay engaged, I think that's one of the critical things. And just backing up real quickly, you asked how driver training is changing. I think one of the big things is how we teach now. And it's not just the elements that we teach, it's how we teach it. That behavior is such a critical component in the success or failure of driving. And so parents that are leading by good example and staying engaged with their teens, that's how they're teaching. And they're teaching the right way. So those are some of the elements that we teach those parents.
I want to stay on the behavior thing for just a second, because I think it's important. We need teens to understand that, you know, the most effective safety feature in the vehicle is a safe and engaged driver, right? And so many of our crashes have a behavioral component associated with them, a decision that was made or not made to do something that unfortunately involves a crash. You know, so again, thinking about teens, you know, I remember my experience with my son when I was first working with him, and I'd try to explain something or correct something, and I always got the, I know, mom, I know. And I was like, how do you know this? You know, you're 16 years old, you've never done this before, but I always got the, I know. And so I'm just wondering, in your experience in working with teens, are you seeing that? Are you hearing that? Or, you know, how receptive are they to these conversations?
So the teens that we work with, you know, the scenario's a little bit different for them. This is an all new thing to them. They've never gone to a driving program like this before. Frankly, they may never have been to any type of driver education at all when they come to our program. So they've just been listening to their parents. Now they're listening to a group of instructors that have backgrounds very similar to mine, a fair amount of experience in the industry. And so because it's, you know, someone they don't know, and because it's someone that has a fair amount of experience specifically in this area, I think a lot of the teens are very open to what it is that we're telling them. Now, you just heard me say, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've taught a wide range of students, people I'm very proud to have taught, and I'm struggling to teach my 19-year-old how to drive. So it kind of goes back to the fact that relationship between parent and teen, that's a critical relationship that parent needs to embrace and figure out, you know, how strategically are they going to teach that teen? Do I get the same type of input from my teen that you had gotten from yours, Pam? Absolutely, I do. But I still stay engaged. I still stay with the process, and we're seeing some positive outcomes there for my son Josh. So he's going to be getting his license soon, and I think it's going to be a pretty safe driver. But I would say, by and large, the teens that come through, they're open to what we're teaching them. And a major reason why they're open to what we're teaching them is the manner in which we're teaching it.
Right. I think that's the key. Absolutely. I wouldn't disagree. Vehicle technology, we talked a little bit about that. It's evolving at such a rapid pace. So how do we help teens and parents really understand the technology, particularly what it can and it can't do? Because that's, there can be this over-reliance on technology or an overestimation, right? How do we deal with that?
So it's really interesting that you bring that up because, again, this is anecdotal observation, but what we're seeing with vehicle technology in terms of people over-relying on it are vehicles that are billed as vehicles that can do it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so those folks, when they purchase that car, there appears to be a real sense of pride that they made the right choice in this vehicle, and the vehicle can do certain things. And the fact of the matter is that in many cases, the vehicle is doing many of these elements, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not a guarantee. And so the vehicles that are listed as almost self-driving or quasi-autonomous, I think people are relying on those systems too much. The
Mm-hmm.
flip side is, and you had pointed this out in your report, the other types of safety systems in vehicles that aren't billed as quasi-autonomous, but are just basic safety systems, people don't know about them. And when they do know about them, they're reluctant to use them. The dynamic there is very, very strange to me. I'm talking about things like automatic braking, lane
Right.
keeping systems. So at the Ford Driving Skills for Life program, we actually use a couple of systems, specifically the ABS or anti-lock braking system, which, believe it or not, a lot of people still don't know how that system works and what the limitations are. And we also use the electronic stability control, which I agree has been a phenomenal piece of software in vehicles, and it's continued to evolve. I remember when the systems for stability control first came out, they were very intrusive. They weren't particularly good. Now they're wonderful. So we use both of those systems on the Ford Driving Skills for Life program to show them what it feels like. I do believe other programs are doing the same. And then to teach parents and teens alike in our Tech Talk module, we go over the various safety systems in a vehicle and what those limitations are, how to use them, what they'll feel like, what they'll sound like, what they'll look like, and then what those limitations are.
Great. I think that's so important. I mean, the more we can reinforce that, the better. I think that's important. We got a couple questions, which I appreciate. Aaron, hello in California. I know you're asking about, for those in the college space, is there any published report on young drivers to age 24? Well, we looked at the young drivers. We didn't look to the age 24. And I can just speak, to the fact that we know when we think about why are teens, and young adults overrepresented in traffic crashes, it's because of two main things. It's immaturity and inexperience. And that immaturity piece is really brain development. So until the brain fully develops, there's that risk factor. They don't see the risk the same way that everyone else does. So I can't speak specifically to it, Aaron. And I don't know, Mike, if you've seen some older teens, young adults in the program. What have you noticed with this age group?
Yeah, we have seen a couple. I was just going to speak from personal experience. I was a 17-year-old until I was 30, I think. So I think, and I actually, I'm joking, but I kind of mean that seriously. I exhibited risky driving behavior well into my 30s. We do, in our parent module, we do cover an element where we discuss really knowing your kid. And so for whomever asked that question, I think it's a wonderful question. You got to kind of know your kid. You kind of got to know how are they developing maturity wise. You might be able to answer your own question just by really kind of knowing that teen. So for the various teens that we've had come through, I'm sorry, kids that are older than teenagers, what we see is a little bit more confidence in them.
Right.
And sometimes that confidence is good. And sometimes that confidence leads to riskier behavior. So again, getting granular, you got to know the person. And no one's going to know the person like the parent will.
That's true. That's absolutely true. I think, and we say this all the time, is parents need to understand where is their child in terms of that maturity? What are they capable of? Are they risk adverse? Are they less, they're likely to be more cautious, or are they like, oh, bring it on, So we have to think about those things. That makes a huge difference. It really, really does. I hate to say this, but we're almost at the top of the hour. It went very, very fast. But I want to thank you, Mike, for being with me today. I really appreciate it. And I will continue to consult you. You are my go-to on these issues, and I enjoy so much working with you. It's always delightful. I also want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us today, and I'll remind you to, if you haven't done so already, to either grab it out of the handouts or download the report at ghsa.org. I want to do a quick plug for our next webinar, November 30th, which is just after Thanksgiving. It's hard to believe November's tomorrow. At 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to be talking about the latest research from the Behavioral Traffic Safety Cooperative Research Program, or better known as BITSCREP. It's a partnership between GHSA, NHTSA, and the Transportation Research Board. And we're going to talk about opportunities to submit research, as well as some of the new research that's coming out of there. So again, Michael, thank you so much.
Pam, all thanks to you. Really, I appreciate you having me on. Again, congratulations on a wonderful report. Speaking of driver behavior, for everybody out there that's listening, it's Halloween tonight, so be aware when y'all are out there. People are going to be doing stuff maybe they shouldn't be. So as a vulnerable road user, with you walking around, just be cognizant.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that reminder, Mike. Everyone out there, please be safe, slow down, be on the lookout for kids out tonight for sure. And let's keep doing this important work to keep our most vulnerable road users safe, but also to help our young drivers get the training and experience they need. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Olivia. And I think, Olivia, you'll sign us off, correct?
That is correct. Thank you all for joining us, and have a happy Halloween.